Miguel Angel Paredes, born and raised in the harsh streets of San Antonio, Texas, came to embody the darker side of humanity, a man whose life spiraled into violence, crime, and eventually cold-blooded murder. Paredes, who became a feared enforcer for a notorious gang, took the lives of 3 individuals in one of the most chilling triple homicides in Texas history. This is his story, a descent into darkness punctuated by betrayal, bloodshed, and retribution. Miguel Angel Paredes was born on July 18, 1976, in Bexar County, Texas. The youngest in a family of 5, Paredes grew up in a household marred by poverty and turmoil. His father, a laborer struggling to make ends meet, was a distant figure, often away for work. His mother worked tirelessly to care for the children, but the streets of San Antonio offered temptations and dangers that she could not shield Miguel from. From an early age, Miguel was drawn to the allure of gang life. By the time he was a teenager, he had joined the Hermanos de Pistoleros Latinos (HPL), a gang notorious for its violent criminal activities across Texas and Mexico. HPL offered Miguel a sense of belonging, protection, and power, things he felt were missing from his fractured home life. However, this allegiance came at a cost. Miguel's initiation into the gang required him to commit violent acts, setting him on a path of bloodshed and brutality. As Miguel's status in the gang rose, so did the level of violence he was involved in. The HPL were deeply entrenched in drug trafficking, extortion, and murder, and Miguel became one of their trusted enforcers. He was tasked with carrying out hits on rival gang members and anyone who threatened their operations. Miguel developed a reputation as someone who would execute orders without hesitation, earning the nickname Trigger among his peers. For years, Paredes reveled in his life of crime. He drove flashy cars, wore expensive clothes, and enjoyed the spoils of the drug trade. Yet, beneath the surface, he was haunted by the violence he had inflicted and witnessed. Despite his hardened exterior, Miguel confided in friends that he often saw the faces of his victims in his dreams. But any pangs of guilt were quickly suppressed, drowned in alcohol and drugs, a deadly cocktail that fueled his paranoia and recklessness. By the early 2000s, Miguel's life was spiraling out of control. His drug use became more frequent, and his violent tendencies more unpredictable. Friends and family noticed the change, but few dared confront him. Miguel was now fully immersed in the underworld, and those around him feared crossing the man he had become. On September 17, 2000, Miguel Paredes committed the crime that would seal his fate. The events unfolded in a nondescript house in San Antonio, a location known for its association with drug deals and gang activity. Miguel and 2 accomplices, Greg Alvarado and Johnny Herrera, lured 3 individuals to the house under the pretense of a drug deal. Their victims were Adrian Torres, 27, his girlfriend Nellie Bravo, 23, and Sean Kaler, 15. Adrian Torres was a small-time drug dealer with ties to rival gangs, a fact that had put him on Miguel's radar. Nellie Bravo was an innocent bystander, guilty only of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Sean Kaler, just a teenager, had been accompanying Torres, unaware of the deadly trap that awaited them. What transpired in that house was nothing short of a massacre. Miguel, along with Alvarado and Herrera, ambushed their victims. Adrian was shot first, his body riddled with bullets as he tried to flee. Nellie, screaming in terror, was gunned down next, her cries echoing through the empty house. Sean, just a boy, begged for his life, but his pleas fell on deaf ears. Miguel executed him with a single gunshot to the head. The killers showed no remorse as they disposed of the bodies. The trio wrapped the corpses in blankets and set them on fire in a nearby field, hoping to destroy any evidence of their heinous act. The smell of burning flesh and smoke filled the air, a grim testament to the brutality of their crime. The charred remains of the 3 victims were discovered days later by a passerby who noticed the smoldering field. The sight was gruesome: human bones, fragments of clothing, and the unmistakable stench of death. Local law enforcement, led by detectives from the Bexar County Sheriff's Department, launched an investigation that would soon unravel the horrific truth. Witness testimonies and informants quickly pointed investigators in Miguel's direction. It wasn't long before authorities arrested Paredes, Alvarado, and Herrera. The 3 men were charged with capital murder, and the case became a focal point in the Texas legal system. For Miguel, his reputation as a gang enforcer meant the police had little difficulty connecting him to the crime. Under interrogation, Miguel initially denied his involvement. However, the evidence against him was overwhelming. Ballistic tests matched the bullets found in the victims to a firearm linked to Miguel. Witnesses confirmed seeing the victims entering the house where the murders occurred, and blood evidence tied the scene to the trio. Facing mounting pressure, Miguel eventually confessed to his role in the killings. Miguel Paredes' trial began in 2001, drawing significant media attention. The courtroom was filled with reporters, family members of the victims, and supporters of Paredes, many of whom still viewed him as a misunderstood figure. The prosecution painted Miguel as a cold-blooded killer, a man who had embraced a life of crime and reveled in the power it afforded him. The defense attempted to humanize Miguel, arguing that he was a product of his environment. They presented evidence of his troubled childhood, his struggle with addiction, and the toxic influence of gang life. They claimed that Miguel had acted under the coercion of his accomplices, trying to shift the blame to Alvarado and Herrera. However, the jury was unconvinced. Witness testimonies, forensic evidence, and Miguel's own confession sealed his fate. The trial ended with Miguel being found guilty of capital murder, a conviction that carried the death penalty in Texas. Alvarado and Herrera, while also convicted, received life sentences, a point that would later be a source of bitterness for Miguel. Miguel Paredes was sent to the Polunsky Unit, Texas' notorious death row facility. Life in solitary confinement was a far cry from the violent, chaotic streets he once ruled. Miguel spent 23 hours a day in a small cell, with only a narrow window and the occasional sound of guards' footsteps for company. During his years on death row, Miguel underwent a transformation. He claimed to have found God, becoming a devout Christian and dedicating his remaining time to prayer and reflection. He began corresponding with religious groups, expressing remorse for his crimes and asking for forgiveness. However, for the families of his victims, Miguel's newfound faith did little to erase the pain he had caused. Despite his spiritual awakening, Miguel did not shy away from discussing his past. In interviews, he spoke candidly about his life in the gang, the murders, and his regret. He often blamed his choices on the environment he grew up in, though critics argued that his excuses rang hollow in light of the brutality of his actions. After years of appeals, Miguel Paredes' execution date was set for October 28, 2014. As the day approached, supporters and opponents of the death penalty debated the morality of his impending execution. Miguel himself remained calm, claiming he had made peace with his fate. On the evening of his execution, Miguel was led into the death chamber at the Texas State Penitentiary in Huntsville. Witnesses, including family members of his victims, watched as he lay strapped to the gurney. In his final statement, Miguel apologized for his actions, expressing regret and asking for forgiveness. His voice, though steady, carried the weight of a man who knew he could never undo the damage he had done. At 6:54 p.m., the lethal injection was administered. Miguel took his last breath minutes later, his life ending as abruptly as those he had taken. For some, his death brought closure. For others, it was merely another chapter in a story filled with pain and loss. Even after Miguel Paredes' execution, the echoes of his crimes continued to reverberate through the lives of those affected. For the families of Adrian Torres, Nellie Bravo, and Sean Kaler, the closure promised by justice was bittersweet. The pain of losing their loved ones in such a horrific and senseless way could not be extinguished by Miguel's death. Memorial services were held yearly to honor the victims, with family members striving to keep their memories alive in the face of enduring sorrow. Local advocacy groups in San Antonio also began to rally around the case, using it as a platform to discuss the pervasive issues of gang violence and its impact on youth. Sean Kaler's age, just 15, became a focal point for anti-gang initiatives aimed at steering vulnerable teenagers away from the path that Miguel had chosen. Sean's mother, speaking at one of these events, tearfully recounted her son's dreams of becoming a mechanic, a dream cut short by a moment of senseless brutality. The story of Miguel Paredes also cast a harsh light on systemic issues that enabled the environment in which he thrived. San Antonio, like many cities, was plagued by cycles of poverty and violence that often left young people with limited options. Gang recruitment in the late 20th century was rampant, preying on teenagers from broken homes or struggling neighborhoods. Miguel, as a child growing up in a tumultuous household, was a prime target. The Hermanos de Pistoleros Latinos, the gang that Miguel devoted his life to, represented more than just violence. It offered a perverse sense of community and belonging for its members. Experts analyzing Miguel's case noted how his loyalty to the gang overshadowed any regard for morality or human life. His indoctrination into this world, beginning in his teenage years, reflected a failure on multiple levels within his family, his community, and the broader social safety nets meant to protect vulnerable children. Miguel's transformation on death row raised questions about the possibility of redemption, even for those who commit the most heinous crimes. His embrace of Christianity and repeated apologies for his actions painted a complex picture of a man grappling with the weight of his deeds. Supporters of the death penalty dismissed his conversion as insincere, a desperate attempt to garner sympathy in his final years. Others, however, saw it as a testament to the human capacity for change, even in the darkest circumstances. Religious groups that corresponded with Miguel during his time on death row spoke of his dedication to Scripture and his desire to use his story to deter others from following his path. In his final months, Miguel wrote several letters to community leaders, urging them to focus on youth outreach and anti-gang initiatives. These letters, while heartfelt, were met with mixed reactions. Some viewed them as genuine attempts at making amends, while others saw them as too little, too late. For the city of San Antonio, the crimes of Miguel Paredes became a grim symbol of the challenges it faced in combating gang violence. Local law enforcement, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of gang-related crime in the 1990s and early 2000s, acknowledged that cases like Miguel's were far too common. In response, the city began implementing new programs aimed at breaking the cycle of gang recruitment and retaliation. Nonprofit organizations partnered with schools to provide mentorship programs for at-risk youth. Former gang members who had turned their lives around were brought in as speakers, sharing their stories in the hopes of deterring others from a life of crime. Miguel's story, while horrifying, became a tool for education and prevention, a cautionary tale about the consequences of succumbing to the temptations of gang life. Despite the trial, conviction, and eventual execution of Miguel Paredes, many questions about his life and crimes remain unanswered. What drove him to commit such a brutal act? Was it simply loyalty to the gang, or was there something deeper, a darkness that had been festering within him since childhood? Psychologists who studied his case pointed to a combination of factors: a troubled upbringing, exposure to violence at an early age, and the dehumanizing effects of gang culture. There is also the lingering question of whether Miguel's execution truly served justice. Critics of the death penalty argue that it does little to deter crime and instead perpetuates a cycle of violence. For the families of the victims, however, Miguel's execution was a necessary step in their healing process, a definitive end to the man who had caused them so much pain. Miguel Angel Paredes' story is one of tragedy on multiple fronts. It is the story of a boy who grew up in difficult circumstances, whose potential was eclipsed by the lure of gang life. It is the story of 3 innocent lives taken in a moment of unthinkable violence. And it is the story of a community grappling with the aftermath, determined to ensure that such horrors are not repeated. For those who study true crime, Miguel's case stands as a chilling reminder of the consequences of unchecked violence and the fragility of the human soul. His actions were monstrous, yet they reflect the broader societal issues that create environments where such monstrosities can occur. The victims Adrian Torres, Nellie Bravo, and Sean Kaler deserve to be remembered not just for how they died but for who they were. Their names are now etched into the annals of true crime history, a solemn reminder of lives lost too soon. For Miguel, his legacy is one of caution, a tale of how far a man can fall when consumed by darkness.